It's been a while, but the immobilized spell still works like a charm.
While I'm a fan of Chinese mythology and imagery in general, I've never read Journey to the West or any of the 4 great classical novels. Like many people, I've seen my fair share of movies and games and TV shows that cherry pick ideas, concepts and themes from Wu Cheng'en's classical masterpiece, and so I've a vague understanding of what it's about. Black Myth Wukong, the new action game from indie devs GameScience, is a retelling come sequel, based on characters and events from the novel but ultimately telling its own story. It assumes a little prior knowledge, but takes enough liberties with the source material for it to not really matter. It's set years after the defeat of Sun Wukong. The monkey god has been cast down, his power distilled into 6 relics now sought after by a league of great evil. All that stands in their way is you, the destined one, a descendant of Wukong who might one day become a vessel for his full and vengeful power. Black Myth Wukong approaches Chinese history from the same outfield as Wolong Fallen Dynasty. There's no place for historical accuracy or rational thought. This China is a realm of gods and monsters, magic and miracles both great and terrible. It's an action game closer in structure to Sekiro Shadows Die Twice than any other Souls-like, but with a less punishing difficulty curve and more bosses per square inch than a mob funeral. When I saw GameScience's initial promise of 80 bosses, I assumed many would be elevated elite enemies or multiple reskins a la Elden Ring. I was very happily wrong, and while I'm not throwing shade at From Software's open world paragon there, frankly Black Myth Wukong takes more or less every other game of its type to school where enemy and boss design are concerned. Of course, small caveat, there are some repeated encounters here and there. A few bosses pop up several times each due to story reasons, and there are a few that are very close in aesthetic design, but by and large, every boss you meet is unique. The ones that do repeat have different movesets for a start, and there are no recoloured grunt enemies popping up with different elemental attacks or what have you. The main thing this achieves is to make Black Myth Wukong a very difficult game to get bored or frustrated with. Enemy placement is exceptionally well thought out, never falling into the same pitfalls that last year's Lords of the Fallen did. Death is a constant threat, but most deaths come from your own mistakes, not because the game decided to funnel you into a room with 10 enemies and 2 elites for a laugh. Bosses are manageable for the most part, but now and then you'll slam into a wall that takes multiple attempts. These never seem to be consecutive though, and GameScience will often follow a tough challenge with several more chewable ones to re-establish momentum. It's not without its share of gauntlet runs, but they're well spread. Before we go any further, I think it's worth a few words to explain exactly what Wukong is and isn't. For a start, it's not really a Souls-like. It looks like one sure, and it moves like one at times. Enemies respawn when you rest, fast travel or resurrect at a keeper's shrine, and there are multiple grueling boss fights. The item system is obtuse, and you'll constantly be picking things up for which you'll have no use for hours, but there's also no currency lost or dropped on death, and crucially, no block or parry. Combat is stamina based, but it's all about dodging and counter-attacking. The Destined One is lightning fast, able to utilise 3 different stances with his staff, each of which has its own skill tree. The onus is on knowing the enemy, dodging at the exact moment and punishing their failures. Combat is a bullet-quick ballet, and you're equipped with a multitude of spells and abilities that you'll need to find and unlock. The first spell you learn is Immobilise, which will serve you like a comfortable pair of slippers for the first 15 hours or so. It quite literally freezes enemies for 5 to 10 seconds, allowing you to hammer them mercilessly or crowd control them while you deal with their allies. Rock Solid lets you deflect enemy damage, while Red Tides is a transformation spell that grants you devastating fire attacks. Spells, transformations, abilities and strands occupy specific slots in the quick menu, meaning you can only ever equip one of each. This, coupled with long cooldown, stops you from spamming them, but they become very handy in a pinch. Later, more and more bosses will become resilient to them, even calling you out with unique dialogue for trying the same spell twice in a single fight. All 4 of these archetypes also have their own skill trees, which branch as you learn more spells and abilities. I hadn't expected build crafting, but it's possible as you unlock new armour and weapons with different stats and effects, and learn to brew potions or modify your healing gourd. More than once a tough boss necessitated a respec, which is free at shrines, and a change of tack. To say too much would be spoiling the depth and intricacy of Black Myth Wukong's gear and combat systems. Even the gourd can be altered, filled with different drinks and effects like Elden Ring's Estus Flask. You can also connect and harness the spirits of certain enemies to call upon in combat, which deal damage or bestow buffs, and there are Monster Hunter World type mantles that negate elemental damage. There's a variety everywhere in Black Myth Wukong, and you'll need to learn how best to utilise all of it if you're going to make it through the gauntlet of bosses. Level design combines elements from Sekiro and Nioh 2. The narrative has a chapter-by-chapter structure, though you can fast travel back and forth between areas once a chapter is done. Certain NPCs and events will move through chapters with you, while some will be lost forever if you don't resolve them before moving on. There's no warning about this either, so it's worth exploring each area thoroughly. There are hidden paths, secret treasures and optional bosses everywhere. If it looks like an area might house a secret, check it out without exception. Rendered with the Unreal 5 engine, Black Myth Wukong is replete with stunning environments and bombastic cutscenes. Playing with an RTX 2060 8GB graphics card and AMD Ryzen 5 3600X, hardly cutting-edge technology, I was able to run Black Myth in 4K with settings on high, and I experienced very few stutters outside of cutscene transitions. I had no slowdown or lag while playing the game, even during boss fights. Considering how fast and responsive it is, that's impressive. What's more impressive is how it runs on Steam Deck. If you can stomach the 128GB download size, it runs wonderfully well on the deck, as you can see from this footage. The overall narrative of Black Myth takes a little while to get going, but once it does, it becomes pretty easy to follow and know who to root for. It doesn't tell a particularly new tale or even an old one in new ways. It's a pretty straightforward MacGuffin hunt that takes you through a variety of biomes with a different NPC guide each chapter, who often bestow short-lived or even one-use abilities on you, like being able to transform into another creature to scout ahead. It's a really cool idea, but is used just a few times, so never becomes stale or tiresome. I failed to find any real complaints for Black Myth Wukong besides some occasional frame drops and a couple of bosses that feel like total difficulty spikes. Or maybe they're just skill checks and I'm lacking. Above all, combat in Wukong requires patience and calm, two things I'm rarely able to muster while gaming. But however you play, Black Myth Wukong is a fantastic video game and a staggering achievement from an indie studio. Like Lies of P last year and Nioh 2 before it, Black Myth Wukong is a sterling example of how to take Souls-like elements and weave them into something that feels fresh and original. It's gorgeous to look at, has some of the best music in any game this year so far, and presents itself with such confidence and panache that it's hard to pick fault with it. You might argue that GameScience is just putting new gems into old jewellery, but it simply doesn't matter. When the level of quality is this consistently high, no one need ask for more. A flurry of sublime combat, intuitive level building and expert boss design, Black Myth Wukong is hands down one of this year's best action games, and for that reason I'm going to score it a 10 out of 10. Hi there, hope you enjoyed that review of Black Myth Wukong. I reviewed it on PC and checked it out on Steam Deck. It runs perfectly well on both of those. If you're going to pick up the game, do let us know in the comments. We love to hear from you guys. If you found the video interesting, please hit like and subscribe. Maybe tag the bell icon too, so you're kept up to date with everything we post going forward. And if you want to support us via Patreon, you can do that at patreon.com/GodIsAGeek. In the meantime, I've been Mick Fraser and you guys have been lovely. Bye.